Part 2. Making a strong brew. 3 years can seem like a long time, or it can go by quickly. Had the good king sat in his castle and let peons do all the work needed to build a potion industry in a world afraid of magic, it would have been one boring cup of tea after another. He probably would have also been obliged to say uninspiring phrases daily. Things like, "I'm the boss. Get to work. Let's see some hustle. Faster. What a disappointment. Do I have to do everything myself? You're fired, and that goes for all of you. Is the good king going to have to beat you with an adjustable wrench?" But none of these words were ever said. No, never happened. Instead, the good king was out in the field, solving problems. Because when you introduce an abundance of magical plants to your garden, the slugs get big, the bees breathe fire, and that cute badger you've seen lurking behind the waterfall starts dancing with catastrophically destructive results. The initial batches of potions were a success. The formula was followed to the letter, and the alchemy was carefully respected. Eventually, when things were looking perfect, a few obstacles presented themselves. The first problem seemed to be with regards to the majestic tower that processed the various magical ingredients from their raw state to a distilled essence. This tower was known as the Wizard's Windmill, using the power of the winds to spin sails, turn cogs, and charge an array of crystalline nodes. The Wizard's Windmill was the center of all of the good king's potion refining, mixing, and distribution. What was the problem with the Wizard's Windmill? The good king found out from his chief overseer that even when the windmill turned, sometimes the distillery would stop working and cool to temperatures that came close to ruining entire batches of potion. The good king took it upon himself to check the node room. Behind a locked iron door was 3 floors of crystals connected through magical bindings made from sulphurous ruby glass. The aura of magical energies was very strong in the room, so it was no surprise to the good king that it had attracted ancient spirits. Nothing had damaged the system, but the spirits were feeding on the energy. The good king didn't plan on finding out how powerful the spirits could become, so he simply began chopping their manifestations of monsters from across the realms. Each room held a surprise, in the form of some strange beast. But at the top of the tower there was obviously a clear hierarchy to these spirits, and it proved to be more challenging than the others. The room began to glow a dark blue, and only a hint of a silhouette could be seen. It spoke with a voice that was deep and ancient. "Welcome to the new home of Doldal the Tangier. For my housewarming, I'm sacrificing 5 helpless fools to the demon lord. You will be number 3. The Intangier's silhouette shifted, but before it could make a move to strike the good king, a cape was flying across the room. The good king had as a plan to throw all of his clothes at the Intangier. If something got caught in the air, he would then swing his great axe in that direction. When his skivvies snagged on something and went still, the good king put all of his might into a decisive attack with stomach-churning effect. Not only was the Intangier, in the very end, tangible, its last words were nothing more than a belch that smelled of rotten meat. Not surprisingly, the body and the smell were gone as fast as they were revealed, in a puff of smoke. But the memory of them would return to trouble the good king during occasional meals. Then the next problem to be resolved was in a small cave near the gate to the good king's castle. For a long time, this cave was known simply as the cave. But now all manner of smells would waft in the air and caress anyone walking the east road not far off. It would seem that different stinks would emerge from the cave each day. Who was to say that this was a bad thing? Sure, sometimes it reeked of bilge water and whistling cheese, but other times a wonderful perfume of flowers and gumdrops would fill all passing nostrils with euphoria. There wasn't much debate between the good king's counselors. They all voted to seal the cave forever. An act that not only shocked the good king, but also sent him running around the room, slapping the counselors in the face and singing, Qui a peur d'une telle odeur? Pas moi, pas moi. T'as les joues rouges et de la douleur? Pas moi, pas moi. Who is afraid of such a smell? Not I, not I. Your cheeks are red, hurt and swell. Not I, not I. Then the good king simply made his way singing and giggling out of the room. He danced down the castle halls and out through the town, waving his hands in the air and kissing any old folks on the nose as he went, ever so joyfully. Once out the castle gate, he crossed a nearby stream and scampered almost gremlin-like all the way to the cave entrance. After the incident at the wizard's windmill, the good king was certain nothing could smell worse than a dead intangier. Certainly not in this innocent cave. Once inside the cave, the good king quit the childish routine and froze. He listened. He sniffed the air. He sneezed. Choo-woo-woo-woo-woo-woo, cried the good king. But there was no reply. Not even an echo to keep him company. This was a clear sign that something was not right in the cave after all. The good king lit a torch after a pause, and then went deeper into the cave. Suddenly, the enigma of the lack of echo was solved, as the good king could see slime of a rainbow of colors covering the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. The slime was alive, but the good king brushed it aside without much trouble thanks to the shovel-like nature of his great axe. Further into the cave revealed a waterfall and some dangerous-looking pits. However, there seemed to be a clear path that had been stamped out beneath all of the slime. Then the good king found a skeleton that was, for some reason, slimeless. He leaned in for a closer look, and the skeleton jerked to its feet, glowing in an ominous red glow and thrashing violently. The good king kicked the pelvis of the skeleton, but the skeleton didn't fall apart. So the good king lifted his great axe over his head and hacked directly through the skull. This not only split the bone, but broke some magical crystal that had been put inside. The skeleton's glow faded away. It stopped moving, and finally it fell in pieces to the ground. Then the good king thought he heard the sound of breaking glass further in the cave. Past more and more slime sloshed the good king, until he found a pile of fragmented crystals, not unlike the one that had been in the skeleton's skull. There was no slime near the crystal fragments, which suggested that it had been a barrier against the slime. Now the good king was very curious. Who had done this? Who was lurking? And what were they having for lunch? It smelled very yummy. Was it fried rice with chives, egg, mushrooms, celery, parsley, onions, green pepper, red pepper, and sea salt? Yes, it was. But who was the chef? Around a bend in the cave and into a grotto, the good king found him at last. Sitting on a stool made of fish leather was a small figure with bluish skin and tiny little horns. "Hello, imp," announced the good king. There was a moment of pause before the figure turned to face the good king to reply. When it did, an expression of shock crossed the face of the imp. "I'm not sharing!" screamed the imp. But this didn't surprise the good king. He had already read about imps in one of the books from the evil mage's library. "If you share your lunch with me, I'll let you stay in this cave," replied the good king. "Never, ever, ever, no!" insisted the imp. So the good king watched as the imp ate some very nice rice. When at last the wok had been licked clean and the imp curled up for a nap, the good king gathered the imp's treasures and trinkets and carried him sleeping out of the cave. When the sunlight touched the blue skin of the sleeping imp, it slowly opened its eyes. "Ah, no fair," grumbled the imp. "Too bad," laughed the good king. "Have fun getting past the slime again, little guy." The imp was half asleep and didn't really care since his belly was full. The good king laid the imp down on some grass by a river and, with a skip in his step, rushed back to the castle kitchen for late lunch. Then came the problem with farmers going missing while working in the magical crop fields. The good king went to the fields and first looked all around him in the bright summer sun. There was some roll in the landscape, not quite plains nor hills. It had a view of the wizard's windmill to the northwest, the castle beyond. Further west the land cracked and became the Fortadia Mountains, while to the east a waterfall of the Crown River roared in the distance, with clouds of mist creeping along the marsh, with tender caresses of wind that flowed from the Viking coast. The far west had more hills and march that went on until it reached the soggy woods and the kingdom of Gorodas. Filling the panorama to the south and all the way back around to the west was none other than the haunted forest. The good king eyed the haunted forest and felt a mix of thoughts and emotions, but mostly he focused himself on one question. Where would he take captured slaves? So he walked in the direction of the haunted forest. On his way, 3 large hills emerged above the tree line on the horizon. These were the Skull Hills, strange formations of earth and stone that made a skull-like shape that protruded from the ground and gazed upon the haunted forest. A few trees grew around the Skull Hills, but very few beyond them. These hills were said to be ruins of a long-forgotten people of these lands, where their old religion was practiced in the time when they called it their home. The true significance of the Skull Hills was lost when the good king's ancestors built the kingdom of Heart and Sword. No wisdom had been drawn from the Skull Hills in over 200 years. This was the perfect place for someone too cowardly to hide in the haunted forest. The ground was already dusty and trampled when the good king arrived at the foot of the Skull Hills. Each hill had the features of a jawless human skull. Sunken eye sockets, nose holes, protruding cheeks, and teeth pressed together like the stones of an archway. More caves, thought the good king as he cautiously creeped into the shape of one of the mouths of the Skull Hills. The interior was dark, but had small beams of light piercing the ceiling that offered a dim guide to the aged temple of the long-disappeared culture. At first, all the good king could hear were his footsteps on the gravel beneath his boots as he explored further within. But then a song of pickaxe resonation began to play. Dig, 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 sang voices beneath the hill. And dig some more. We dig for you, O great werebore. The good king wondered who this werebore was, and how it had enchanted some of his followers. The answer was not far. The tunnel he followed opened to a large hollow room. The room was filled with werebore. Not one great werebore, but hundreds. At least, to the eye of the good king. From around a corner the good king spied the scene. The minor werebores dug relentlessly deeper into the ground, apparently straight down. Then at the center of the throng he spotted a werebore neither singing nor digging. This must have been the grand werebore. It didn't just have the head of a boar like the others. Nearly all of its body had pig qualities. And with its pot belly protruding, it sat in a mud-covered wheelbarrow. The grand werebore looked to be smiling, maybe even napping. The good king watched on for a few minutes more, but nothing changed, at least until he started to feel a little sleepy. The good king slapped himself in the face and felt normal again. However, the sound of the slap traveled across the room. The good king looked to see if it had been heard. Nothing seemed to have changed at first, until he noticed the grand werebore was looking directly at him with wide eyes and a scowl that could only be expressing disapproval. The grand werebore squealed, and the digging stopped. Simultaneously, the other werebore dropped their tools and looked at the good king. Since there was obviously no more reason to hide, the good king emerged fully from his concealment. What happened next is a mystery, for many werebore in the room were under an enchantment spell and have no memory of the trance. My best guess would be the grand werebore died ironically from a piece of rock that fell from the ceiling and crushed its head. As for the good king himself, when I asked him, he said that he only remembered a breeze from the outside flowing down the tunnel he had followed, carrying with it some dust. The dust got in his eyes and nose, and he had sneezed. When the good king had recovered from his sneeze, he quickly lifted his great axe to block any dastardly sneak attacks. None came. And he spotted the grand werebore had fallen from his wheelbarrow throne and was bleeding from the forehead. Each of the other werebore looked to have vomited a little in their mouths as they transformed back into humans and elves they had been before the magic of the grand werebore had lured them to the Skull Hills. The good king had solved a good many riddles and obstacles brought on by the new magic works of his kingdom. In doing so, precautions were set up to prevent further disruptions from getting out of control. All the while, the good king's confidence began to slip away, however, for he had questions yet unanswered. At the time, the good king knew only of one soul that could answer these questions, the evil mage. But it was that evil mage that had tried to kill and use the good king, Jail Strongbrew. What if the evil mage was still alive? What if the evil mage was still naked?